excited to have Ray Erasmus joining us from South Africa, as we were just saying. So Ray's a really passionate horseman who is author of a book, Communicate with Your Horse, which I've actually forgotten to order up until now, and I've just bought it on Amazon. And he's a big 5-horse safari guide. I'm sure he'll tell us a little bit more about himself as we go, but we're really excited to hear a slightly different perspective on horses and horse training. Just a little normal reminder to everyone, if you could type your questions in the Q&A function rather than in the chat function, just makes it easier for Thea and I to find them. And Ray's really happy for you to type. If you've got any questions, there's a little bit of science that he'll talk through at some point during tonight's webinar. So if you've got any questions at that point, then type away, because he's got lots of different ways of explaining the same information so that we can all understand it really clearly. I think that's the background. Anything to add there?
I don't think so, other than I can't wait to hear about your training process and how you can help a horse deal with a lion and we deal with plastic bags in the hedge. So over to you, Ray, to enlighten us.
Absolutely. We'll see you at the end for questions. Thanks, Ray.
Thank you very much. Let's jump in. Okay, so you can move on the slide then. Just going to give some light background on myself, like Thea and Heidi has already given a little bit there. The Big 5 horse safari, that's really the element that changed everything for me and brought me to this point where I want to help people, help horses. It's also a slogan that I've created with Horse Flow Academy, helping people, helping horses. It's just purely the goal of helping horses to relieve their stress throughout the everyday life. If a horse is able to deal with pressure from wild animals like lions and elephants, dealing with natural or unnatural or man-made objects should be relatively easy for a horse to conquer if they set up in the correct way. So horse trainer, it's a foundation of mine, started as a child. At the age of 10, I started riding my first horse. I had a school horse that helped educate me, actually, quite more than what anybody else did. So this horse was a professor to me. So also mentioned that in the book that Heidi just mentioned about. So basically that was my foundation, and then I started training horses from there, stallions at that young age, and so forth. I'm going to jump on so that we don't waste too much time on explaining more about me. I've done my farrier apprenticeship in South Africa. I do my own horses feed and so on. Walking safari guide. I specialize in doing walking safaris in dangerous game environments, both in Botswana and South Africa. And then also I coach clients on training their horses and also and riding. And then, like Heidi mentioned, self-published author on the book Communicate with Your Horse, which is available on Amazon. We can jump on to the next slide. All right, so like Heidi also mentioned, you're welcome to ask questions in the questions and answer section as I go along. So this is just a layout of the entire evening. So the philosophy, everything is based on this. And the bottom I just noted there, we all learn when working with horses. There is no one shoe that fits all. All these principles will apply. It's just the way they are approached and implemented will be unique for every case study with every horse and every problem that you're trying to solve with your horse. So let's run through the process of this philosophy. It is sort of laid out in relative order. When you adopt first principle thinking, it's really something that it's going to help you identify and accurately identify problems, and not just having a general idea of a problem, but you will be able to pin down the problem you have with your horse, and therefore you'll be able to create a more effective solution. The physics of progress, it's a step-by-step process on how to solve a problem. We're going to go into depth and detail on that with that slide. So each of these bullet points, they have their own slide that I'll go into more depth and detail. Foundational education, the most fundamental education your horse requires in order to be able to communicate effectively with the human and you with your horse. So it goes both ways. So that foundational education requires a clear line of communication. I'll explain that in more depth and detail as well. And then also having influence with your horse, being able to have directional and energy influence with your horse. I'll explain those in depth and detail. Specific skills and knowledge. This will be your desired discipline or field of interest with your horse, whether you want to become a what can I say, either Grand Prix dressage rider, a Grand Prix show jumper, 5-star eventer, or whether you just want to become proficient at hacking or hunting with your horse. Those are the specific skills and knowledge required on top of the foundational education. The complex triad, it's the basic science. These are three main things that interplay with any problem with the horse. It's the biology, physiology, and the psychology. They are all interlinked, and one influences or impacts the other. So understanding the basics of science regarding these three elements, and also, the psychology side is of course not science, but that influences the biology, and the biology both the psychology. So understanding that is going to be essential. We can move on to the next slide there. All right, discussing first principles is just a way of approaching either a problem or any form of substance. So first principle thinking, it was first identified by philosophers in the over 2,000 years ago. Aristotle wrote the first basis from which a thing is known. It's the basis of first principle thinking. It's where it was founded or coined. What is the most fundamental truth? It's a kind of question that one would ask for first principle thinking. So this is actually a question that Elon Musk in America, from founder of SpaceX and Tesla and so on, it's one of the main questions that he always asks when he's trying to solve a problem or create or design or innovate new things. He's like, what is the most fundamental truth? Like making rockets reusable, for example. It's very far-fetched and far from horses at the moment, but I'm just trying to explain the importance of this kind of thinking and also the results it'll have. All right, so the question that I like to ask is, does it have to be that way? When you are busy working with your horse and training, and you find they're all stressed out and they're not understanding what you are asking, I often ask myself, does it have to be that way? Is there an easier way that we can train our horse to achieve that specific goal? How does a horse learn? It's a fundamental question that one needs to understand. If you do that, then teaching or training a horse becomes a relative simple feat. What are the constituents of interspecies communication? This question came upon me in the early days of specializing with walking safaris, being able to be on foot safely in between elephants and lions and rhinos and buffalo, and being in the bush in nature, in the middle of the African wilderness, on foot. Really, you make yourself really vulnerable, and you put yourself in experiences, not always intentionally, but you come across close encounters with these dangerous game, these dangerous wildlife, and you need to find a way how to effectively communicate with them so that they don't become overly aggressive and attack you, nor that they fear you to the extent where they run away by your first sight. So developing a clear line of communication between different species. So this question frowned upon me initially then, and then also training with horses from a young kid and all the way up to doing Big 5 horse safaris, where this question became even more important for me to understand, as there is different factors that when you put a horse in the play there, if I can put it that way, you've got horse and human interspecies communication, you've got human and wild animal interspecies communication, horse and wild animal interspecies communication, and then you have the group of horses which the guests are on with the horse safari. So the group of horses affecting the wild animal's behavior, the group of horses, each rider influencing each horse influencing each rider. So it's a whole mix here of interspecies communication. So understanding the fundamentals of that really makes one communicate more effectively to get the desired result out of the situation. Yeah, I'll reference more to that. Just basically to finish up on that, for anyone maybe might be confused with all of that complication with different species communicating with each other. Say there's a wild animal and a group of horses. In the Big 5 horse safari industry, the lead horse with the guide will always mediate between the wild animal and the group of horses. So you get to a point where the one horse is responsible to mediate and neutralize the behavior of the entire group of horses, whether it's a lion or an elephant, whatever the wild animal might be. That one individual horse is the responsible one that needs to mediate the situation of the group, either being dominant to deter the threat, or to become a bit more submissive and graze so that the wild animal does not feel threatened by your presence. All right, that's a brief explanation around that. What should my horse be able to do before I ask, ... Say if you want to train your horse to do a canter pirouette, you need to be able to do many things before you can do that. So you need to break that down. And this question is a first principle question. So before you can do a canter pirouette, you need to be able to do a turn on the haunches at a standstill, just as a basic foundation. And then you need to be able to do collected canters. You need to be able to do shoulders in, shoulder out, half passes, etc., before you can confidently ask your horse to do such a difficult feat. Yeah, sorry, that's quite a mouthful. If there's any questions, please leave them in the Q&A. We can move on to the next slide there, Adi. All right, so physics of progress. This is actually based on a business model or business physics. I take this from there because it's very applicable for me with horse training as well. So it's a step-by-step process that one can follow to solve any problem. When you start with a problem or you find a problem, the reason there's a problem, it's the thing standing in between you and your goal, the thing you want to achieve. So if you don't have a clear goal, you don't really have a problem because you don't know why you're doing or why you're struggling to do what you do, right? So having a clear goal is where it all starts. You see there, I've got clear goal, and then it's broken up into 3 parts. Mission statement, which is like the main thing you want to achieve, whether it's Grand Prix, dressage, show jumper, 5-star eventer, hacker, hunter, cutting horse, raiding horse, trail horse, whatever you'd like to achieve with your horse. That's the mission statement. That's the big picture. And then you've got hard goals, which is the difficult things of jumping a course of 1 meter 40 or 1 meter 50, or being able to do certain maneuvers for Grand Prix dressage, or being able to complete a specific test with a specific score, being able to hunt and do gallops of 10 minutes or so on, and whatever it might be. And then clear goals becomes the individual exercises within those feats. So jumper would be being able to do a crossbar of maybe a meter high, or maybe an upright of 130 or 140 before you want to progress to a course of 140. And then you can introduce oxer and fillers and so on. So you break things down to the clear goal, which is a really, really basic thing. And then once you've done that and you still find you've got a problem, then you need to define that problem. Your success with your horse will depend on how good you are in defining your specific problem. So being able to achieve your big goal will be determined by how good you are at solving problems with your horse. And you can only solve problems if you know what they are. Okay, Albert Einstein loved this quote: if you can't explain a problem simply, you don't understand it very well. And it's not to be crude or rude. It's about making sure that you understand what you want to achieve and then what is holding you back from achieving that. And you break that down, and through first principle thinking, sorry for the abbreviation there, FPT, determine through first principle thinking what your problem is. So I can't do a canter pirouette. Okay, but like if the clear goal is canter pirouette, then you should be able to have many other things in place, like I explained in the previous example. So your clear goal might need to become a turn on the haunches at a standstill on the ground without a saddle. And then if your horse can do that, then that's not a problem anymore. So then you say, okay, let's introduce the saddle and the bridle. All right, my horse can do that now. Okay, let's make the clear goal and expand on that and grow it. If that makes sense. All right, so clear goal, beginning, define the problem, very clear, develop hypothesis of how am I going to solve that clear problem, that defined problem, and then implement it. You've got nothing to lose when you implement. Henry Ford loved this quote as well: failure is the ability to start again, this time more intelligently. So when you do implement and you fail with your hypothesis that you thought you're going to solve this problem with, then you can just start again. But you're not going to make the same mistake. You're going to be advancing from that mistake. I forgot to quote this part, but failure is the most information-rich data stream that exists. This is from a entrepreneur, billionaire, business motivator, strategist, etc., Tom Bilyeu. For any of you interested in or which knows of him, it's a quote that he likes to use quite often. Yeah, I'm going to leave it for there right now. Any questions, leave it in the Q&A section and I can follow up on that. But yeah, understanding the physics of progress and utilizing that when you find severe problems in your training is going to be essential to your success with your horse. Right. All right, so foundational education. First of all, you need to establish a clear line of communication. So if you can't communicate with your horse or ask them questions, they will always be frustrated, anxious, or stressed out, or build up tension in their body, not understanding what it is you're trying to do with them or talk to them, or like if they don't understand it, it's not going to be effective. Therefore, it's called effective communication. The goal of effective communication is becoming in the present moment, something that horses automatically and naturally do. They're always in the present moment. They don't have any false pretensions. They don't live in tomorrow. They don't live in yesterday. Yes, they do have associations, especially when there's been trauma. So in the nervous system, there'll be certain triggers and associations with fear and anxiety, etc. But they don't live in that. They react and respond to the stimulus in the environment. We're going to move on back to that in one of the later points here. Effective communication, a couple of principles laid out here in order. Again, clear goals, know what it is you want to achieve with your horse. If you go into a session, say you go into the arena to do a training session, when you go into that arena, be very clear on what it is you're trying to achieve. And then is that clear goal aligned with your mission statement? Is that what you're going to train that session aligned with what you want to achieve with your horse? If not, are you wasting time, effort, energy, so on? You get the drift. When you have clear goals, you develop intentions. So when you go into that arena, you know why you're going into that arena, you develop intentions. And intentions is the visualization in your mind about what it is you're trying to achieve. And try and work on developing your intentions so that when you develop intentions, you get the feeling, the sensation, the emotion of that success of that movement within your body. And you see and you feel in your mind what aids you are applying, how you are applying them, imagining you're applying them in the lightest possible way so that you can achieve your goal with your intentions. So at the end of the day, your horse starts responding to your intentions because our intentions will reflect in your body language. Not dramatically, but enough so for a horse to respond to those intentions. It doesn't happen overnight, it takes time. Otherwise, everybody would become a Grand Prix dressage rider, for example. But top Grand Prix dressage riders understands how to develop intentions and get their horses to respond off of those intentions. After you've developed intentions, you apply active body language by applying those aids that you imagined in your mind or that you developed the sensation or emotions in your body. And now you become active and express it to your horse and you want them to respond to that stimulus. So that's active body language. Then you need to, okay, so I'm going to skip a step here just so that we can align these. So once you've applied active body language, then you need to pay attention and focus and realize when your horse is responding to that stimulus. When you find that your horse responds to your stimulus, it is absolutely essential that you release pressure in that specific moment. Like there's no further communication with the nervous system, there's no further stimulus for the horse. Your attention and focus was there when you applied active body language and your horse responded and they gave a correct kind of effort, then you release that pressure. That is the reward, so the releasing. When you release, you apply passive body language. So active and passive body language goes hand in hand because when you give one, you need to give the other. So you give active body language, you want your horse to do something, you ask them a question, they give effort to respond to that, and then you apply passive body language afterwards. And then that integrates with rest and digest. So release is that immediate release of pressure. And that's a reward for your horse or giving your horse the opportunity to understand that they are doing the correct thing. Rest and digest, it's a further principle that I'll back up with a bit of science that you can understand why it's in here. Rest and digest is a minute to 10 minutes afterwards, allowing your horse to just digest that information. It helps them consolidate the information and learn quicker and retain information much better. Empathy and Umwelt. Okay, so all of those previous things are put together, and then the empathy and Umwelt is going to be a blanket over all of these principles. Umwelt, it's a German word. I really love this word. I use it a lot. Umwelt is the world as it is perceived by a particular organism. That is the definition. And basically, it is understanding that your horse sees, smells, hears, and feels the world differently to what we do. So they hear at different frequencies. Yes, we do have a lot of overlapping frequencies, otherwise we'll be deaf to each other. But horses may have a much higher range of frequencies of which they pick up on, and that's often the cause of horses reacting in the environment without us knowing why. Okay, smell, they've got a much more acute smell. Vision, we've got a much more acute binocular vision, but horses have a much more acute peripheral vision, and also they are much more sensitive towards movement in the environment. So it's very important to understand these differences so that we can acknowledge. Now, empathy is acknowledging all of those things. Empathy is acknowledging, I'm putting myself in my horse's shoes or hooves, and then seeing like, this is why he's responding, because you see in which direction he's looking, then you try and see like, that thing moved, that was a grass, or maybe sometimes a plastic bag, or a guy on a bicycle, or whatever it might be. So that's seeing what your horse is seeing. Empathy goes a step further, and there's a bit of science backing that as well, and it's really important because this is why it's in here. Empathy is the ability of one nervous system influencing the nervous system of another being. Excuse me. So one being's nervous system affecting another being's nervous system. Okay, so say you are stressed, you're going to cause your horse to stress. Say your horse is stressed, your horse can cause you to stress. So many riders here will agree to that. Many trainers here will probably agree to that. That you've experienced, like when you're not present in the moment, or your horse gets a fright, you might feel anxious for a moment, and that is empathy. That is, you are actually becoming present in the moment because your body was forced to, because it became dangerous. Your horse just stressed. When your horse is calm, it can also calm your nervous system. Because of this, because of horses being in the present moment, equine therapy is a really big winner in the entire world to treat and assist with treatment of certain kinds of trauma, and it's present all across the world in all different cultures. So it's really lovely to see that, and this is the reason why, because of horses becoming present, and then empathy being present as well, or applied empathy, sometimes intentional, sometimes unintentional. Now I bring it a part of the training to make empathy intentional, so that you can apply empathy, you calm your nervous system down, you become in the present moment, you understand your horse's umwelt, and then with enough practice of this and repetition of this throughout training, and giving your horse a chance to find relaxation through the training, you can actually start influencing your horse's nervous system through your intentions by being in the present moment, applying empathy, and being calm, and transmitting it over to your horse. A lot of Liberty artists are really, really, really good at this. So Frederick Bignon, a lot of you might know him, or otherwise you might know Ben Atkinson. He's in your front, in your backyard. They're in England, and one of his most inspirational mentors is Frederick Bignon, really an incredible horseman, and he's got this ability to influence horses' nervous systems like this, like crazy. Yeah. Okay, moving on. I hope you understand that. Any questions, please leave it in the Q&A, and then we can follow up on that. I want to get moving here. Basic skills, directional and energy influence. Sorry, Heidi, just quickly finish these two. Directional energy influence, it's the basic skills required, being able to direct your horse's body in every single direction. You're talking about, or we're talking here about being able to ask your horse's hindquarters, so turning on the forehand, being able to turn your horse's hindquarters to the left and to the right, exclusively. So identifying each segment of the body, the hindquarters, the rib cage, the shoulders, and the head and the neck. We want to be able to influence each segment of the horse's body individually. Then we can start bringing it together, and that's the more advanced skills and maneuvers required for more or further progression of all disciplines. But you start by creating this language. So again, effective communication, developing a clear line of communication. So making sure that you've got an aid for each part of the body, and then you can start talking a language. But first we need to create the words. So I'm going to use this analogy. Let's use the analogy of developing a language. This language, first of all, is applying all these principles, just like you would have certain grammar rules, so on. Then you've got the language itself, which exists out of, so this is first principle thinking. This is breaking things down. So a language consists out of letters, then words, and then sentences. And then you can start comprehending and speaking, right? So now directional influence is building those words. So the words is hindquarters, rib cage, shoulders, head and neck, and then each direction, left and right. So these are development of the words. I'll show if you in the Q&A, we're going to probably run into some questions where I can explain this directional influence a bit better. Energy influence then is basically just going to be paces within each gait, or energy levels at the static movement. So say you turn on the forehand, you ask your horse to give a small step across, or you ask your horse to give a big step across. There's a difference in energy. So the same goes when you're busy walking your horse. You've got a medium walk, you've got an extended walk, the same with trot and canter. So there's paces within each gait, and therefore that's energy influence. And so this is the most fundamental truth about basic skills, the foundation of your horse. Preparation for riding is going to go on top of all of these things. So I like to do directional energy influence from the ground first. No saddle, no bridle. Get your horse to understand the language. And then you start linking these buttons, all these aids, the bit, where your legs will be on the saddle, applying all these buttons on the body so that you can activate certain words to create this sentence, or then start speaking with your horse. I'm going to use Ben Atkinson here again. He really likes to refer to getting to a point where you can translate with your horse. And this is sort of the preparation for that translation. So the preparation for riding will basically be then still from the ground, putting a saddle on your horse, putting a bridle on, and going through this directional energy influence with the buttons of your legs in the future before you start the ridden work. So literally applying pressure with a stirrup and the stirrup leather a little bit further behind the growth line, and asking your horse to turn on the forehand, and so on. Yeah, again, please, any questions down in the Q&A, and then we're going to move on to the next slide, and then get cracking so that we can get to the questions. Specific skills and knowledge, I'm going to go very briefly over the slide. It's basically just your desired discipline that you want to be in, and the skills and knowledge that your horse requires to achieve these things. And this is going to be your Grand Prix dressage, Grand Prix show jumper, 5-star eventer, hacker, hunter, cutting horse, reining horse. You're going to need certain skills. You need to identify those skills through first principle thinking. And then your horse needs to learn those skills, and that requires concept lessons, like really just the physical educational lessons of teaching these skills. Like they need to learn the new word in this vocabulary. So their intelligence, their IQ needs to increase. And you do this through teaching these things with individual phases. Then you can go on and master those skills through accurate repetition. And the science will explain a bit more about that. It counts for the horse and the rider. So you need to know how to ask your horse effectively to make sure you don't confuse your horse by not being consistent, and therefore trainer on the ground, eyes on the ground is always a good thing to help you out. But yeah, it counts for you and your horse. When you get to the higher levels and specific skills and knowledge, it's essential to start integrating these concepts. You can read through the example there, but otherwise we're going to move on there. All right, let's jump into the basic science quickly. Any achievement with your horse requires neural activity. Any achievement within yourself, being able to lift my hand up or being able to sit in your chair and blink, it requires neural activity. Thinking, what we are doing right now, or listening. If I haven't bored you yet, you're still busy listening. It requires neural activity. It requires focus, and there is neurons firing within the brain and the nervous system to achieve a certain result. So it's a really important topic, and it is what makes life what life is. It makes the experience of life possible, and it makes movement possible and any achievement possible. So understanding this basic science revolves around neuroscience, and it'll help you with everything you do with your horse, especially solving any problem. When I train, I like to talk to the horse's nervous system. Talking to the horse's nervous system when training changes everything. So when you do this foundational education and you train your horse to turn on the forehand or turn on the haunches or do any form of directional change, when you are talking to the nervous system, it simply means you are asking your horse to do something. So you're asking your horse's body to engage in a specific movement. Now, when the nervous system engages with a specific movement, initially, it's very messy because there's no clear path. So there's neurons, like these cells in the body, they are firing all over. So there's different parts of the horse's body activating. So this is why there's so many failures. This is why it takes a lot of repetition to get accurate movements. So you're asking your horse one time and you're getting some kind of activation of a circuit. Okay, so we're going to talk about a circuit here. So it's a neural group. So a group of neural cells communicating with another group of neural cells. So we've got upper motor neurons, which is in the brain and the spinal cord, and they communicate with lower motor neurons. So this is during the training phase. And the lower motor neurons are the cells inside the muscles that contract muscles to move the limbs. All right, so you've got the upper motor neurons communicating with the lower motor neurons, because now there's stress in the nervous system. So we are asking our horse to do something, that's the stress. And then we apply thought for the horse, so that we apply pressure or stress, and that forces the horse's brain to think. When they think, they are activating circuits. Now your question needs to make total sense to your horse. And then certain neurons in the body will fire and try to solve this problem. So the horse is going to go into a problem-solving mindset, because you're creating a stressor and the horse doesn't want stress. Then when that circuit activates, you release pressure. So that's what talking to the nervous system means, is you are talking to a certain circuit within the horse's brain, within the horse's body. When that circuit activates, we release pressure. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Otherwise, it's Q&A. Neural activity, it's electrical and chemical. So there's electrical signals that goes from one neural cell to another neural cell to activate it. And then there's chemical releases, like literally. So there's a neuron has got a core, and then it's got dendrites, and then it fires chemicals from one neural cell to another. And it goes through a processor that's called a synapse. And from the synapse, from the one neuron, it spits out information of chemicals, a bunch of chemicals, to another neuron. And this is how this communication takes place. So it's electrical and chemical. So when you hear people talk about neuromodulators, neurochemicals, this is how they move through the body. Because we've got a central nervous system. So just jump three dots down there, 3 points down. Central nervous system, brain and body, brain and spinal cord. Then we've got a peripheral nervous system, everything that extrudes from the central nervous system towards the rest of the body. So that is the peripheral nervous system. It's important to just differentiate between the two there for basic scientific purposes, if anybody's more interested. But when we refer to things, and therefore I used the earlier explanation of upper motor neurons and lower motor neurons. Lower motor neurons is in the peripheral nervous system, upper motor neurons is in the central nervous system. So therefore it's differentiated. Right. Any Q's and A's, let me know. I don't want to lose you guys. So you are having a biological experience, which we call life. Our emotions, everything else we experience in life, feeling good, feeling bad, feeling frustrated, upset, anxious, it's a biological experience. So the biological experience are these chemicals and electrical signals being active in certain parts of the brain and body. So when our horse is nervous, spooky, certain parts in the brain and body is active. And we want to change that activity. And that we do through talking to the nervous system when training. So we train other parts of the body to become more active. We train parts of relaxation, like dropping the head and neck, to be more motivating and more comforting than being stressed and aroused with a head up and open eyes and increased heart rate and a lot of cortisol release in the body, and it's not a nice experience for anybody. Yeah, all right, so I hope that makes sense. Now, talking about the autonomic nervous system. This is a crucial part, and it's been highlighted a lot in the recent probably 5 years or so. Of it's become a lot more common in the vocabulary of horse trainers. So not autonomic nervous system so much, but parasympathetic and sympathetic activation within the autonomic nervous system. So you've got the autonomic nervous system, and it's got two branches. So you've got the parasympathetic branch and the sympathetic branch. So these are the two opposites. And the sympathetic branch is stress, arousal, anxiety, and so forth. It's just as examples. So that's the far end of the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. And then you've got the parasympathetic nervous system, the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. That is the opposite: calm, relaxation, rest, etc. So we need to teach our horses to be able to go into each of those. And the better your horse becomes in going and switching from one to the other, the more calm and centered they become. But at the same time, you can ask their their autonomic nervous system to become more aroused for competitions, but it's easy to switch back to the parasympathetic side of it. So this happens through training, and it only happens if you consciously practice it. So I'm using this basic science for you to put it in your toolbox so that you can refer back to it and say like, my horse is actually in this state. I don't want him to be in that state right now. So let's try and get him back into the more calm state. Or I need my horse to be a bit more stressed now. I need the arousal because he's going to do a severe cross-country course or crazy cross-country course like the recent badminton. There was a couple of new jumps, which was quite interesting. So jumping a major gap, there's a lot of psychological barriers to these, maybe not as big a physical jumps, but the psychology behind them that are more challenging. So those riders who have experienced those things, they've really learned how to get their horse to become centered. And you see this within people as well, and it's very important. This is also what differentiates average leaders from great leaders in business world, etc. All right, so that's the autonomic nervous system. Any questions, please Q&A. Plasticity is learning. Plasticity is the nervous system's ability to adapt and change in response to experience. So that is basically, if you have a look on the screen there, you'll see those are neural cells. So it's an animation of neural cells. And then you see the electrical activation, which is the lighter blue, and chemicals within the core. But if you look where the red circle is, that's the end of a dendrite. So that is a new connection beginning to happen. So that's one neural cell searching for another neuron because it's trying to communicate with a certain part of the body. So that's neuroplasticity, is literally new connections happening within the nervous system. So it is cells making new creative, not necessarily creative in their sense, but I'm using it as a reference here, like unique connections. One cell making a unique connection to another cell because of a specific stressor or stimulus in the environment that required the body to adapt, or the nervous system to adapt for that purpose. Let me use a simple example here. So you blink your eyes when you look at bright light. You don't have to think about it because it's an automatic response already, because your brain has neurons. So your eyes are actually pieces of brain, just for interest's sake. But your eyelids are connected now to motor neurons, which will allow certain muscles to flex when you look at bright light. So it's an automatic response. But the only reason it's there is because of these neural connections. So you've got the wire connected from one neuron to another neuron. And the more it repeats, the stronger that neuron becomes. So you see there's thick wires and there's thin wires. The thin wire is the initial search for a solution to relieve the stress, so that the organism can be safe. The reason learning is there so that the organism can survive, reproduce, and be safe. All right, so now the thicker wires within the brain or the nervous system is things that are commonly repeated. So it becomes more insulated. So the message can be transmitted quicker. Okay, so this is learning. Okay, so it's really important. I hope you guys haven't lost me yet. That plasticity, I'm going to leave it right there. Apart from explaining when does it happen, neuroplasticity happens and it requires non-sleep deep rest. That's the NSDR. So deep rest or REM sleep. REM sleep is rapid eye movement sleep. So it's really deep sleep. It's where you dream and have a really, really good night's rest. That's when the plasticity occurs. All right. Moving on to the next point there, memory. The most effective way to develop good memory about any experience is making it emotional. You can think back about any experience of your life where you're sitting right now. And if you want to think about a very emotional experience, either hopefully not all of you go into this, but like you can think about trauma, or you can think about happy experiences. Like think about really, really happy experience, or beautiful sunset you had, or like having a beautiful jump with your horse, just achieving this harmony with your horse and just your horse tuning into you and you tuning into your horse, and it just felt like you were one. That moment, like, you'll remember that, and you'll remember every detail about that, how it felt and what you smelt in the environment, and how warm was the day, and so on. So that's deep memory, and the more emotional an experience, the better the memory. So the more emotional we can make the training experience for our horse, the better they'll memorize it, the better they'll remember it. The more motivation there is for the nervous system to acquire this plasticity to adapt and change. Now, epinephrine and adrenaline, these are the two main factors. It's the same factor, but it's the two main factors, I'll explain that in a moment, that enhances memory. So adrenaline, we all know, most people know what that is. It is the thing that allows us to move. So it's stress, so adrenaline is released to move the organism. Epinephrine is adrenaline, but it's in the nervous system. So we're talking about epinephrine in the brain, and we talk about adrenaline in the body. So we want to release a spike of epinephrine through our training. So you need to sometimes work through a struggle with your horse. And when you work through the struggle, on the other side of that struggle, that's when the beauty happens. Now, that struggle normally causes this rise of epinephrine and adrenaline in the body, so that your horse is a little bit stressed, and then you need to keep asking them, and they work through the stress. And when they find relaxation on the other side, it's a big snap, like the penny just dropped. They just caught on. And then we move on to the next step. Once that has happened, we give our horse either a 10-second break or a 1 to 10 minute break. A 10-second break is a release. I like to call it a micro release. A 1 to 10 minute break is a macro release, or release and digest. Remember back in the foundational education slide, it was rest and digest. So that's where the memory starts consolidating within your horse. So giving a 1 to 10 minute break of zero stimulus after the entire training session. This needs to be intermittent breaks, like not anticipatory for your horse. Like they can't say like, okay, after this movement, I'm going to rest. Like after this movement, maybe they can rest, but then you ask them to do that 2 more times, and then they only rest after 2 repetitions. Next time after 1 repetition, the time after that after 5 repetitions, making it impossible for your horse to anticipate. So intermittent rewards. Intermittent rewards is going to accelerate the learning process. I wrote there reps per unit time. So repetition is how the nervous system changed. Remember when I pointed out to the neurons, look again at the picture there, you'll see the thicker wires. They've had more repetitions. And the more repetitions, the more insulated they become, and the quicker they can respond and react and become active. So the more repetitions we do, the thicker the wires become, and the better your horse can perform a specific task. Now, when you have that 1 to 10 minute break or the 10-second break, your horse will replay what just happened. So not your horse, your horse's nervous system will replay what just happened. So when there's zero stimulus, your horse is standing there licking and chewing, or his head is dropping, ears flopping, whatever you like, or you see the eyes blinking. Your horse is finding some moment of relaxation, and you don't apply any new stimulus. Your horse's nervous system replays what just happened in reverse order. So the last thing will be the first thing. So in reverse order. The secret here is at 10 to 20 times. So at 10 to 20 times the speed of real life. So say you gave your horse a 10-second break. You just added 100 repetitions, or 100 seconds worth of repetitions to that specific exercise. So I like to call this free reps, because you didn't do any effort, but your horse's nervous system repeated what just happened. So resting is accelerated learning. You literally 10 to 20 times the speed. So it's a lot of free reps, and your horse is not getting exhausted physically. So it's not a bad thing. Okay, I hope you get that. Q's and Q&As if you're not sure on that, please. Errors. So errors is the way that the brain opens up for neuroplasticity. So it opens the door for neuroplasticity. So if we don't have errors, there's no reason for the nervous system to change. That's why I mentioned the word stress earlier. When we apply pressure to ask our horse something, we apply a stressor. So there's a reason for our horse to listen now, because there's some stress in the environment. There is some pressure pushing them in a certain direction, even though if the cue and aid is extremely soft So there is some form of pressure. And when our horse tries to solve and resolve this pressure, they're trying to move away from this pressure, that results in errors. But these errors are good. You need to make these, the horse needs to make these errors. The only way they know the difference between an error and a correct movement is by the release of pressure. So if you release when your horse is making a technical error because you think that's an error, your horse thinks it's the right thing. So it's extremely important, and this is why all good trainers will always be adamant on saying, always end on a good note, because if you don't, your horse thinks the error is the correct move. And it's not because they're trying to be rude or naughty, it's just because that's what they understand, that's the message that you're giving them, or that's what the message that you are giving their nervous system. So you need to give your horse the message of the nervous system when they do the correct move by releasing pressure, when they do the desired thing that you have asked. I'm not going to go into the depth and detail of the other, it's going to take a lot of time up. Movement. Movement is controlled by these following things. I have mentioned upper motor neurons and lower motor neurons before, and I'll explain that in a moment. CPGs, sorry for the abbreviation again, central pattern generators. So this is the part of the brain and body that becomes automatic, and the stuff that allows a horse to walk in rhythm, trot in rhythm, cant in rhythm, or jump without thinking, just they're coming along to something, they jump. So it's the stuff that becomes automatic, central pattern generators. So anything that has a pattern to it, and you don't have to apply energy to think of doing it, then that's being activated by the central pattern generators. It saves energy and time within the nervous system. Upper motor neurons gets engaged with learning. So upper motor neurons is the thing when you think about it, you in your brain, you look at something, like say, for example, you're looking at a pen or a mark or whatever, you look at that and you intentionally go and pick it up. You activated upper motor neurons. Those upper motor neurons communicated with lower motor neurons and allowed you to achieve that task. Okay, let's go back to the horse here. So the horse now finds a stressor because you give a stressor. So now all of a sudden the central pattern generators become quiet because the horse is busy experiencing stress from your side because you're applying pressure. So now the upper motor neurons become active. Now you want to link those upper motor neurons to the lower motor neurons. Okay, so the lower motor neurons, like mentioned earlier, is in the peripheral nervous system. So it is all the neurons of movement that is connected to muscle, which allows the limb to move. So the central pattern generators communicates to the lower motor neurons, and the lower motor neurons makes the limb move through the contracting muscles. The upper motor neurons communicate to the lower motor neurons, again, which allows muscles to contract to make the limbs move. So the end goal is communicating with the lower motor neurons through the upper motor neurons. So you need to talk to the horse's mind through all the principles that we've discussed in the beginning, which is the psychological stuff, to allow this biology to fall into place. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Again, Q&As, please. Accuracy is not as important initially to accelerate learning. The more errors you make, the quicker you will learn when you reward the correct movements. Okay, so the science is pointing towards an average of 85% of the time making errors when learning a new skill. Okay, not performing advanced movements. 85% of the time when making errors in the beginning when learning something is good. Then 15% of the time correct. So asking your horse to turn on the forehand, you ask them, they step incorrectly, they still move the shoulders, you ask them again, and you say, do that for 8 seconds, and they finally give you one good step and you reward them. That's the perfect ratio. So don't expect perfection in the beginning. Don't look for perfection in the beginning. Allow your horse to make errors and reward them for the correction. I'm going to leave that right there. If you have lost me, if you're not sure about anything, our Q&As, and we're going to answer them here. The main goal of the Q&A right now, next, Heidi, we can move on to the next slide. Then basically the main goal is going to be to get your questions from your problem with your horse. If you haven't already submitted them, please submit them in the Q&A, and then we're going to be answering them. Yeah, let's try and move on to the first question if possible, Heidi.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ray, so much fascinating information. No, absolutely fascinating. And I think it's a great point. So folks, start typing your questions of problems that you've got with your horses, and then Ray will, I guess, talk us through how that the psychological and the neurological information actually plays out in real life. So we've got one question we will kick off with literally kick off. So this is quite a long question, so I can repeat if need be. So Sam says, my Rocky Mountain horse takes offence at being told what to do and starts trying to run off and growls. Unusual. He wouldn't go off the yard alone, starts backing up, spinning, etc. He's a 6-year-old gelding. I've had him a year. He came straight from running with the herd, so has learnt a lot since coming here. I can do loads using Liberty, but on a line, he's a nightmare and starting to get scary at times. As a side note, he bit me yesterday when I was ponying him out. Yikes. So, sounds like he's behaving much better in Liberty than on the line. Any thoughts about what Sam can do?
Yeah, and I've got experience with that as well, where a horse is better at Liberty than what they are when they are controlled, in a sense. So that sounds like there's a lot of activation. Again, I'm going to point out to the neurobiology here because it's the key. So it would be nice if she'd be able to be online. I'm not sure if that question is online. Is that person with us?
Yeah,
Sam, you said?
Yeah, Sam, S-A-M. Yeah, Sam's there. Yeah, do you want to know? Yeah, if you want to know a little bit more, just ask. Yeah, and Sam can put it in the chat.
So Sam, the basic context that's required for the situation is being really clear on the goal. What are you trying to achieve with your horse? Are you trying to get your horse to become a really good trail horse? And if that's the goal, then we need to set up the training for that. Okay, so that's the sort of the main goal. Okay, then we break that up into first principles. So is your horse, so remember back in one of the first slides, I had the question, the first principle question there. For my horse, in order for my horse to do that, what else should he be able to do? Or it was some form of that question, if that makes sense. So is your horse able to walk without the saddle and bridle, just on a halter and lead rope, or head collar and lead rope? Are you just able to walk with your horse forward, stop them and back them up without them overreacting? Because that's the most fundamental thing to be able to do with your horse, because everything else relies on that. You need to be able to lead your horse to the paddock, to the stable, to go mount him, to go saddle him. So leading is a big part of the foundation. So if that's a yes, then move on to the next thing. Am I able to put my leg on, and is my horse able to respond to my leg? Or am I able to make contact with the bit and the bridle and get my horse to respond without overreacting? If they're overreacting, it simply means that the nervous system is overwhelmed. Okay, so this is why I wanted to refer back to the nervous system. So it simply means that when your horse is biting or there's a fuss, the anxiety is increased. Remember the autonomic nervous system, parasympathetic and sympathetic part of the nervous system. So sympathetic is arousal and stress and anxiety. So first of all, Sam, it sounds to me like your horse is in a situation where he experiences 6-year-old gelding, like you said, it came out of the herd. Sounds like he's got separation anxiety. It's a very common thing with all horses. Why? Horses are herd bound. Geldings, horses, young geldings or young male horses, whether it's a stallion or gelding, they have the nature and all the neural circuits in the body to be together in a bachelor group. This is their nature. We take their nature away from them, so we can expect trouble, or we can expect resistance or tension, because we are changing the nervous system. Okay, so you want to give your horse a positive experience. So the Liberty work can be really good, but you need to develop a line of communication where you can make contact with either the head collar, starting off with the head collar and the lead rope, so that you can make contact with his body and influence him in a positive way, and allowing him to find relaxation through that contact. So you build it up with a head collar, and then you can move on to developing directional influence as a whole. So making sure that you can heel the hindquarters both ways, heel the shoulders both ways, Heel the flex the head and the neck, like carrot stretches kind of thing. Flex the head and the neck to the left, to the right. Whatever you do on the one side, do it on the other side. Make sure you find a balance within the nervous system and the body, which will result into the physiological side, making sure your horse is balanced physically. Okay. If that question, what in that question have I missed out there, Heidi?
I think that's most of it. So yeah, turning, spinning, running off ground. So it's about not going off the arse. It does sound like, yeah, separation anxiety.
So there's a bit of separation anxiety and then also aggression by the sounds of it.
Yeah.
But that aggression is not because probably he doesn't like you.
Yeah.
It's probably just more because he's protecting himself, because he's feeling insecure and the wrong part of the nervous system is active. So we want the autonomic nervous system, we want the parasympathetic branch to become more active, Sam. So asking your horse to do things, even at liberty, it's a really good practice. If you can get it right at liberty, keep on doing it. But start adding the contact, which is going to be the head collar and the lead rope, then maybe the saddle with the lead rope and the head collar, and training with a saddle, applying leg pressure from the stirrup alone, only on the one side without your body weight, and just getting all the buttons created. So you develop a clear language. If you have a clear language, there's a lot less resistance and frustration that is possible for your horse to experience. So if I would start speaking, say, Afrikaans right now, there'll be a lot of resistance from all of you listeners, because, I mean, you're not going to understand what I'm saying, my home language, but it's going to create a barrier between us. So it's the same for you and your horse. If you don't speak the same language, there's an immediate barrier. So therefore, they are sometimes moving into the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system, which is stress, arousal, anxiety, and that lights up parts of the nervous system to protect themselves. And then it's the ancient fight or flight. Most people have a lot of common with hearing this. So the ancient fight or flight mechanism. So a lot of those symptoms that you explained from your potential problems with your horse, and also the biting, those are symptoms from the ancient parts of the brain being active, overly active.
So it's interesting, isn't it? Because he behaves well at liberty. So maybe it's the feeling
trapped and claustrophobic.
Trapped and claustrophobic, maybe. When the lines are added. Great, thank you. Claire's got a hand up. I don't know if you mean to have your hand up, Claire, but I'm going to allow you to talk. If you want to say something, you can come off mute and do that. If you didn't mean to have your hand up, no worries.
It'd be nice if you can do a live question. Get some more feedback.
She's written a question in the meantime. So yeah. So Claire, we'll read out your question. If you want to embellish and take your hand down or keep it up, just high five us. That's good. So Claire says, fascinating, thank you. I'm building up gradually to keeping my spooky horse calm when hacking. Developing really slowly. I try to be really consistent, but some days my horse just reacts differently to the same hack, same environment. What do you think makes horses react differently day by day? Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah.
So experience your own emotions. Do you feel the same every single day? You've got good days and you've got bad days. So our ability to manage our autonomic nervous system, being able to switch between parasympathetic and sympathetic, I like to use the word threshold, stress threshold, because horses need to develop this. Every horse that I've ever worked with, which was so-called a problem horse, had a very low stress threshold. And that's simply the ability to go back into the parasympathetic nervous system after being aroused. So going into the sympathetic nervous system, it doesn't stand for sympathetic, it stands for sympa, which is Greek or Latin, I think it's Latin for together. So sympa is together. So that means there's a lot of neural activity. So together means a lot of circuits in the brain, a lot of neural circuits in the brain active. And then parasympathetic is less active. Okay, so that's just the difference between the two. So we don't want overactivation, because overactivation means a horse overreacting. And overreacting to stimulus in the environment means a spooky horse. And a spooky horse is dangerous because they react 0.7 times quicker than what we as humans do. So by the time that you respond, it's already happened. And that's why people fall off, and that's why horses sometimes unfortunately kick or bite us before we can respond. All right, so it's building your horse's stress threshold. We do that in a controlled environment first. All right. So building so much confidence within your horse and asking them to do more complex maneuvers. Literally, you can train tricks. If your horse has a good foundation, they can ride, they can school them, and they are almost a school master, say, for instance. You can start teaching them tricks. The more you teach them, and you are the only consistent thing, like you change the way their body needs to move, you make it really challenging. You challenge the nervous system, but you let them find a relief with you. They start relying on you as the person for safety. So when they're unsure about anything, if you have a good foundational education, you've got many tools in your toolbox. If your horse starts spooking, flex the head and the neck, or ask your horse to make contact with the bridle and ask the head to come down, or ask your horse to do a little bit of a half pass, or like just play with your horse. Activate the nervous system, but activate the nervous system listening to you and not so much the environment. There are a couple of cues and indicators, but yeah, if there's any other, if they can if they can expand on the question, they're also welcome to.
Brilliant, thank you. So, is it possible to generally help your horse be less spooky, or do you have to help them get over one thing at a time?
No, that's the beauty about talking to the nervous system. So really good question. Thanks for that. So that's building the horse's confidence within themselves by dealing with stress, but you start with individual things, but you make sure that they grow it with everything that you do. So I think Buck said this, US natural horseman from one of the earliest, when the natural horsemanship era started, is one of the first guys. He said, you're either training or untraining your horse with every single encounter. So if you want to increase your horse's stress threshold, you need to do that with every single thing you do. So whether you're leading your horse, or whether you're riding your horse, or whether you're grooming your horse, always when you get the opportunity to find a challenge, exploit that challenge. Like your horse has got a ticklish spot on their body. Allow them to find relaxation when you touch that spot, but not forcing it, but like gradually expanding their ability to cope with that stress. Or your horse jumps out of the stable or out of the horse box. Get them to gradually back out or gradually walk in. Like you're expanding their ability to deal with that stress with every single thing that you do. And your horse gets to a point where the momentum takes over and they adopt this mindset, which is often called with us humans, it's called the growth mindset. The knowledge and ability to know that you can learn anything with enough repetition. And this is the neuroplasticity that we describe. This is why the biology is back and so important again. So the horse's nervous system gets to that point where it's like, I'm not sure what this is, but before they activate that flight response, the anxiety response, or the attack response, they stop and think for a moment. So you sometimes get horses, a bit more mature horses, they spook, but they just literally stamp their feet down on the ground. And then afterwards they sigh. They're like, okay, that was nothing. But they didn't overreact. They've learned, they've built, they've gradually grown their ability to deal with stress in the human environment.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, so effectively building resilience by just increasing the stress and removing. Fantastic.
I can also maybe give this analogy as a reference. Imagine a bucket of water. Yeah. So the water goes all the way to the top. You can add single drops and you'll see the water tension still keeping the water, even though it starts going over the edge. And it just takes one drop. And then all of a sudden, many drops of water spills over the side. It just took one drop, but a lot of water spilled over the side. So that's the sympathetic nervous system. Like you keep putting stuff in. Like I love the way Warwick Schiller, he's a trainer in America as well, Western horse trainer America, and also a natural horseman. He uses this. He's got the Journey on podcast for anybody interested to listen. He has a lot of interesting guests on as well. So he uses the example of a rabbit. So your horse is going along on trail, sees the first rabbit. He has a look, but it's okay. But guess what? The water is busy filling into that bucket. Now you carry on along. Your horse sees another rabbit. This rabbit runs past him right in front of his leg. Like, whoa, okay. Gets a bit of a up shoulders, and he carries on walking. But now there's more water into the bucket. He sees the third rabbit, like this rabbit is like just on the side, but he saw the rabbit. And then like there's still more water that was poured in. By the time he sees the fourth rabbit, the bucket is overflowing, and all of a sudden he gets a spook at this rabbit. He just went past 3 rabbits, but he's spooking at the fourth one. Like, so the stress threshold has been breached, if that makes sense. So I'm just using that as a reference or analogy to be able to use it as a reference.
That makes total sense. I was riding the other day past, there's a bird scarer, you know, it makes a loud bang. It goes off 3 times every time. And that was the closest I could possibly be to it, my worst nightmare. And it went off the first time, I'm like, hold it together. He held it together. Second time, I'm really trying, Mum, I'm holding it together. Third time, whoa, okay, I'm just about. It's exactly that, exactly that.
So if we swap bunny rabbits for cows, I think we might be able to help Laura with her question.
Yes, true.
So my horse has major issues with cows, slightly bigger than bunnies. I tried to encourage her past some on foot. She was coming with me, but I think looking back, she was very close to being over this threshold that you're kind of describing. Unfortunately, the cows then started walking towards us. She completely lost her mind, pulled back, and was trying to run. I managed to calm her eventually, but obviously there is now a negative experience set. What would you say would be the first step to tackling this?
Breaking things up to first principles. Okay, so if there's opportunity, make it easier for your horse. Is there sheep around the area? Then go visit sheep and make your horse confident in following sheep. So maybe to shift this around as well. Okay, let's make it easier for you in your situation. So you've got a pasture with cows in your area. If you're able to talk to the herdsman and you get a cow in what we would call in South Africa a kraal, with a small paddock, and you get a cow as an individual cow, and you're able to follow the cow instead of the cow following you, or even if you chase the cow with your horse, or on foot, somebody else is with you and you push the cow away and you follow the cow. So you change the game from the cow coming to you following the cow. It'll make a dramatic difference right away. But if you're able to break things down, where you add a herd of sheep or something, it'll be even easier to your horse. But whenever you find a big problem, break that problem down into the most fundamental truth and say, my horse, okay, first of all, is your horse able to deal with basic man-made environments? Does your horse spook at other sorts of things or not? If your horse is not spooking at any man-made thing, but only natural things moving towards them, then you need to increase their stress threshold to deal with that kind of stimulus. This is what we need to do with all with the Big 5 horse safaris. Every guide is responsible for making sure that they understand their horse that well, and the horse trainers involved. You need to be able to push off even a 6-ton elephant bull when they come at you full speed. So it's a big problem, but you don't start there. Even the best of the best lead horses, which are able to deal with that level of stress, which is really ridiculous level of stress. For a few of you who've been ever to Africa, like so you don't start there. You start with working with warthogs, or pigs, or you start working with basic animals or other herd animals. You see a herd of zebra. I mean, a giraffe. For most horses across Africa, with all the horse safaris, all horse safaris know that giraffe are one of the biggest challenges for all the young horses. It's very difficult for them to acknowledge and to understand the body language of a giraffe, as the head is up there, the ear movement is up there, and the body down there. It's a big animal, and they're sometimes very curious, so they move towards you, or they run away. Either way, it's a big movement, so it's a lot to recover from. So you don't start with a giraffe either, but you introduce the giraffe with another horse maybe. So that's the other approach that I'm trying to get to. So you get another experienced horse, which is good with cows, and you let them graze next to the cows, and then you come up with your horse in hand, and you introduce them that way. And then your horse will see, okay, well, here's another horse grazing with the cows. It's not the end of the world. They're both herding animals. And when the more mature and confident horse is grazing, the cows will also not be as inquisitive because they see the animals relaxed. But when they see the horse is a little bit anxious or stressed, confident cows which grew up with humans or might come and investigate to see like, what's going on with you? And that's going to make your horse even more scared, and that might be something like that would happen. I'm not sure.
Brilliant. So Laurie, if you can't get a sole cow in your paddock to play with, then it sounds like the more confident horse route might be the way to go to get past. So brilliant. Thanks, Ray. That's perfect.
Another obstacle question. Fiona's got very anxious, horse who's very anxious about tractors or big noisy traffic. The sight more than the noise. She uses the acoustic ears that go on the horse's ears, but would like for him to learn it's okay and not just muffle the sound. How can she do this safely? And she doesn't have a tractor to practice with.
Not many people do. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Okay, but if you do have a vehicle, which you should be having if you have a horse, because you should be able to move and travel along or go to shows or whatever it might be, or put a horse box, use a vehicle as a base. Even use the horse box as a base, and make sure that your horse is confident with the object standing still. Then get to the point where your horse can follow the object. You get somebody else to do, well, okay, first of all, make sure that at a standstill. If the noise is also a big influence over your horse, I can guarantee you the smell is also going to have a big impact. The smell of a tractor is the fresh mud on the tires. Turned over soil has a major impact on horse behavior. They are really sensitive to the smell of fresh soil because it's turned over soil, and it can indicate potential threats of the environment, like holes being dug by wild animals or so on. So fresh soil is always a activation of the sympathetic nervous system within a horse. And I've experienced this all the way to the top lead horses, which are able to face full-on blown charges from lions. Like even them, like they smell fresh soil from tractor tires. They also like, I'm not so sure about this. They even might hesitate. So it's a natural thing, but it's not. It's going to be more than just the sound, more than just the visual side. The smell might also be included. It depends on the variation and also your horse's confidence within all those things. So break it down and make sure your horse is fine with the smell. Like go find a fresh patch of turned over soil and go walk over it, go play with it, jump over it, whatever. Like make sure that's not an issue. Then make sure you can move around a vehicle without your horse worrying. Go graze next to a vehicle. Like just park the car next to the lawn and go graze on the lawn next to the vehicle. Let your horse get the nice green grass underneath the tires or something. Make sure you don't compromise your horse's safety. But do silly stuff like that. Build it up. Like, okay, your horse is fine eating grass next to the side of the horse box of the vehicle. Then get somebody to start the vehicle. And then walk your horse towards the vehicle started, but in a grazing fashion, not in a stressed arousal fashion. If they're only comfortable grazing 10 meters away, allow them to graze 10 meters away. When they want to turn their head away from the car, suggest to them, like, let's rather move a step closer and graze closer to the car. When they do that, find relaxation and walk away. And then when they get to a good point, let them follow the car. So get somebody to drive the car down an open driveway or whatever, so your horse can decide what they want to do. But you suggest you keep on walking forward, but give a nice space. Find that comfortable space. If it's 10 meters, it's 10 meters. If it's 5 meters, it's 5 meters. And then you follow the car. And then you get to a point where your horse licks and chews, finds relaxation whilst following the car. Then allow the car to continue driving, but then you stop and graze. And you do nothing for 10 minutes. You do nothing. You don't interfere with your horse's brain. And your horse will switch very quickly. And then you can keep on building that up to maybe going to a quiet countryside road where there's vehicles driving by on a regular basis. Go to the side, go graze, let the cars drive past, and so on. Build it up, build it up.
Brilliant, fantastic, thank you. And one last question from Claire. Really interesting question, Claire. Can all horses be trained for safari, or are some better suited, different personalities?
Very few horses are not suitable for the group side of things, but very few horses are capable of building such a high threshold of being able to deal with stress to become top lead horses. And it takes a lot more than just dealing with stress. It also takes and requires certain personality traits, just like certain, say for example, world leaders. Like not any person can go step into the shoes of a world leader and think they're going to make effective decisions. They might be overwhelmed with certain stresses and not being able to cope with it. And it's the same with lead horses? So yeah, good question, but it takes a very special personality. Earlier, Sam's question about her gelding having some form of separation anxiety and so on. The moment the separation anxiety kicks in, you lose your horse's focus on you, and you have less influence over them, and they become more reactive, and they become more dangerous. So starting off, you want to start training your horse as a lead horse to deal with the pressure and stress, being as independent as possible. The more independent the horse, the higher likelihood he'll become a good lead horse. Group horses, most horses can become a good group horse if they have the opportunity to get the experience of the mediation from a good lead horse, to see that, that experience was okay, nothing bad happened. So just ensuring that when you leave, nothing bad happens. You are technically making a promise to your horse that every time that any stressful environment occurs, that nothing bad will happen. You need to keep that promise. The day you disappoint your horse, it's going to take them many, many years to prove them different.
Fantastic. Great place to end.
Yes, absolutely fabulous. Great questions, everybody, as well. Absolutely brilliant. I'm just going to share screen again so you can say where people can find out more about you, right?
All right. Yeah, so that was quite a mouthful from my side. There's a lot of things I tried to explain in a very short time. I've never done it in such a short time. So if you have any further questions that develop because of that, yeah, go to probably Instagram is the most effective place. You can send a direct message on Instagram if you'd like to. Otherwise, see, my email address is not on there. I forgot about that one. You can also do it that way. But otherwise, just go to Instagram, and then either that or the YouTube comments. Instagram, the most effective place. Direct message and ask your questions there, and we can interact. We're not a large number of groups, so you're quite lucky. So I can actually spend a bit of special attention to any questions that you do send in direct messages, and we can try and help solve your problems. And this can include going to the extent of you sharing videos, and then I can make further suggestions or even make videos on my side to actually give you proper visual examples, or I can refer to some of my YouTube videos that you might be able to watch to help solve your problem.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That's fabulous. Thank you, Ray. Thanks for joining us. Have we got a what's next? Yay, we have. It's proper teamwork, this is. So, gosh, we're nearly there already, aren't we? We're nearly.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's almost June. Yeah.
How's that happen? So we're during the summer we tend to go with 2 live webinars each month, just because they're lighter nights. People are wanting to spend time out playing with their ponies. So 2 in June, we've got Justine Harrison talking about understanding fear in horses, great equine behaviourist. And then we've got Trudy Dempsey, another behaviourist, but she's focusing on clicker training. So introducing clicker training and positive reinforcement to your horse. And then we're going into July with Dee Soelo, who's a sports therapist and specialist, and she's going to talk about how you can use sort of the elastic bands, but the large ones,
not the little ones, yeah,
the wide ones, in order to improve your fitness and position as a rider. So it can be really helpful to you in terms of being in the right space and developing yourself in the right way. So that's us for the next few webinars. Ray, been brilliant, so fascinating, really, really interesting information. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I highly appreciate it. And thanks for everybody also engaging and also the questions. Please continue asking. It's all about building the community, the equine community, and getting everybody involved as much as possible and allowing our horses to live the optimal life. And that's the end goal, because
Absolutely.
we put them in our human environment. So it's our responsibility to give them the best possible life.
Absolutely. I think that's all of our goals, isn't it?
Absolutely. So that's the golden thread that runs through all of our experts and webinars. Really, everybody wants to pass on knowledge that helps us look after our horse, these beautiful, wonderful beings, in a better way. So that's a great sentiment to end on. And just one last thing to flag is that if you want to check out the podcast that Ray did with us just have a look on the website as well, because that you find out even more about him.
Even more about him and his benefits, absolutely. And if you fill in the questionnaire at the end, just give us some feedback about tonight, but also let us know what else you'd like to see. Thank you very much. That's it for us.
Thanks. Cheers.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.